In the summer of 2003, I had this idea stuck in my head for a while. I wanted to hike from the Pacific Ocean all the way to Mount Olympus, cutting right through the heart of the Hoh rainforest in Washington state. I'd done a few decent backcountry hikes by then, some overnighters, some longer, but nothing like this. The Olympic Peninsula had always drawn me. I liked the feeling of being swallowed up in something bigger than me. Something older, wetter, denser. The Hoh rainforest is like that. You can walk 20 feet in and feel like you've been dropped into another world. So I planned it out for early July. I knew the area was known for wet weather, but the forecast said it would be relatively dry that week. I packed like I usually did: standard ultralight gear, GPS, compass, topo maps, water filter, food, bear canister, tarp, first aid, headlamp, multi-tool, and a couple of emergency flares just in case. I wasn't worried. I liked hiking alone. I liked the quiet. I got started at the coast, near the mouth of the Hoh River. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. You get that mix of salt and cedar in the air, the rich smell of moss and earth. I followed the trail upstream, passing fallen logs as big as boxcars, some cut through to make room for hikers, others you had to climb over or duck under. I made good time. The trees were impossibly tall, and the sunlight filtered through like gold mist in the late afternoon. Ferns reached my waist, and little birds fluttered around but didn't seem scared of me. It was quiet but alive. That night, I made it to one of the designated backcountry sites along the river. Nobody else was there. I set up camp, cooked some instant rice and jerky, and listened to the water rushing nearby. Slept like a rock. No problems. I woke up to a world of white. Fog. Not just mist, not morning haze, but full-blown. Can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. Soup-thick fog. I'd seen fog before, but this was another level. It hung low and never lifted. I gave it some time, hoping the sun would burn it off, but by 10 a.m., it was still as thick as ever. GPS was spotty, signal kept jumping. I couldn't get a solid fix, but I knew that if I just followed the river upstream, I'd hit the next campsite eventually. The trail got harder to follow. Everything looked the same in the fog. The trees all looked identical, moss-covered giants, and the trail was just a worn-down patch of forest floor, half hidden under fallen leaves and pine needles. Sometimes, I'd lose the trail entirely and have to backtrack to find it again. The world was so silent in that fog. My own footsteps sounded like they echoed. Every now and then, I'd hear something, like a branch crack far off or a distant bird call, but I couldn't tell what direction it came from. The fog played tricks on your ears. By late afternoon, I was wiped. My legs ached. My neck was stiff from looking down and trying not to trip over roots, and I hadn't seen a single hiker all day. I found a small clearing next to the river, about 20 yards across, surrounded by thick trees. It seemed flat and dry enough to pitch the tent. I figured I was maybe a mile or two short of where I wanted to be, but with this fog, I wasn't risking pushing on in near darkness. I set up camp, laid out my sleeping bag, and ate a protein bar for dinner. I didn't want to waste time cooking. The air was damp and still. My shirt stuck to my back. Everything smelled like rotting leaves and cedar bark. When night fell, it dropped hard. Pitch black. The fog didn't go away, it just got darker. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face without the flashlight. I stayed in the tent, laying on my back, listening to the river nearby. It should have been relaxing, but it wasn't. There was a weight to the dark I hadn't felt before. Something made my skin prickle. I wasn't exactly scared, but I couldn't relax. Felt like something was watching, like the forest had gotten thicker around me, closed in tighter. I tried to ignore it. Sometime after midnight, I'd guess around 2 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first. I hadn't had a nightmare or anything. I just suddenly found myself wide awake, heart racing a little, ears wide open. That's when I heard it. A noise, a kind of breathing, not normal breathing. This was deep and slow, heavy. It sounded like someone dragging each breath out, like Darth Vader but without the mechanical edge. Just raw, damp huffing, almost like an animal, but not quite. It had weight to it, wet, throaty, guttural. It was close. I didn't move, just laid there frozen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My first thought was bear, but this didn't sound like a bear. No sniffing, no footfalls, just breathing. Long, slow inhales and sharp exhales. The tent walls seemed to shrink in. I felt like I was in a coffin. I reached slowly to my side for the flashlight. I didn't dare unzip the bag all the way. I slid the flashlight into my hand and clicked it on softly. I pulled the drawstring of the tent door just a couple of inches open. The sound was 5 feet to my right. 5 feet. It was just outside the tent. I pointed the flashlight toward the noise and flicked it on fully. The light hit a wall of brown fur. I gasped, then held my breath. It was a Roosevelt elk. Massive, maybe the biggest I'd ever seen. His shoulders looked like boulders. The light hit his side, and he jerked his head up. I saw his eyes reflect the light, 2 pale green orbs, wide and confused. He made this sudden snorting noise, flinched, and turned to bolt. In his panic, he turned the wrong way and slammed headfirst into a thick alder tree just beyond my tent. The sound was insane. It was like someone swinging a baseball bat into a steel pole. The impact echoed through the trees. I winced, turned the flashlight, and saw the elk stumble, fall to its side, and go completely still. I just sat there. Everything was still, silent, then groaning, shifting. He wasn't dead. After a few seconds, he scrambled to his feet with a wheeze, stumbled away from the clearing, crashing through the brush with a kind of awkward strength. Branches snapped, footfalls faded, then silence again. I turned off the flashlight, zipped the tent shut, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My heart pounded for hours. At dawn, the fog was still thick. I stepped outside, stretching my stiff back and legs. I found hoof marks in the dirt and a smear on the tree bark where the elk hit it. There was a clump of fur caught in the bark. I don't know how he didn't break his neck. I packed up quickly. I didn't want to spend another night in that clearing. The fog stayed with me most of the day, but by late afternoon it finally began to thin. I picked up the trail again and made it to the Glacier Meadows campsite, just as I'd planned 2 days before. There were a few other hikers there. Seeing other people felt strange after being so alone in the fog. I didn't tell them anything, just ate quietly, nodded when someone said hello, and slept like a dead man. I made it to Mount Olympus 2 days later. The sky cleared. I got some amazing views from the Blue Glacier overlook. But the hike didn't feel the same after that night. I never forgot that sound, that breathing, that split second before the light hit him. It wasn't just the scare. It was the fact that something so massive, so powerful, could get just as lost in the dark as I could. We were both blind, both stuck in the same fog. He didn't mean me harm. He was just as confused, just as scared, maybe. But that night changed how I felt about the wilderness. It's not about fear, it's about respect. That forest doesn't care about your plans or your confidence. It's older than you, deeper than you, and it doesn't owe you anything. You walk into it, you take your chances. You walk out and you don't forget it. And I haven't. Not once. Not in over 20 years. It had been years since I started hiking alone in the Santa Monica Mountains, and by now I knew every switchback, every ridgeline, every soft patch of trail on the 5-mile loop I liked most. It wasn't for exercise or some deep need to connect with nature. It was more about shutting off the rest of the world. That loop became a routine I clung to, especially when the days got loud and the city felt like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I always timed it for dusk, intentionally, that part of the day when people were heading home and the light was just starting to soften. The trails cleared out fast after 5 p.m., especially on weekdays, and by 6 or 6:30, the chances of running into anyone dropped to almost zero. I liked that. I liked knowing I had the hills mostly to myself. That day, I started a little late. It had been hot earlier, one of those LA spring days that pushes the mid-80s. But by the time I parked at the trailhead, the air had cooled. The light was shifting fast, and long shadows stretched across the gravel lot. I zipped up my lightweight hoodie, tossed a flashlight and a water bottle into my side pocket, and started walking. I didn't need a map. I'd done this hike over 100 times, probably more. The trail started with a steep incline, zigzagging up the hill in short, dusty stretches. The dirt here was always dry, even after rain, and it kicked up in tiny clouds with each step. I kept my pace steady, not rushing. I liked the quiet more than the workout. The city faded behind me quickly. Once you got a few bends in, the trail blocked out the roads, the houses, even the distant drone of cars. Just wind through dry brush, some distant birds, and the soft crunch of your own footsteps. I passed an old oak tree that I always used as a checkpoint. About a mile in, the bark was split from lightning decades ago, but it still stood tall. A few crows scattered when I got close. Further up, I spotted a coyote loping along a side trail, not far off. He paused, looked at me, and then vanished into the brush. They never really bothered me. We had an understanding, mutual disinterest. Around mile 2, the trail dipped into a shaded canyon. This part always felt cooler and a bit damper. A narrow path hugged the hillside, and a few tiny springs sometimes left damp spots in the dirt, though they were mostly dry this time of year. The smell of sage and dusty rock filled the air. That's when I first saw him. At first, I thought it was just another hiker. Nothing unusual. I could see a figure moving up the trail ahead of me, coming from the opposite direction. He was still far off, maybe 200 feet, but something made me slow down just slightly. He was alone. No backpack, no water, just walking steadily toward me. As we got closer, I took in more detail. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe late 50s or early 60s. He wore a faded blue hoodie and light tan pants. His stride was casual, almost too casual for someone who should be wrapping up a hike at this hour. His hands were in his pockets. That stood out. Nobody hikes with both hands in their pockets unless they're not planning to use them. But what got me, what made something deep in my chest tighten, was his face. I recognized him. Not like, oh, that's the guy from the gas station. Or, he looks like my cousin. No, I knew that face. I'd seen it dozens of times, frozen on a screen. It was unmistakable. It was the actor who played Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. At first, I thought maybe I was wrong. Could be someone who just looked like him. That's a hell of a thing to assume about someone. Hey, you look like a movie serial killer. But as we got within maybe 10 feet of each other, I saw it clearly. The jawline, the eyes, the mouth. Older, sure. Softer around the edges. But it was him. And then he looked at me, and he knew that I knew. Our eyes locked, and I saw something shift in his face. Not surprise, not amusement, just this sort of heavy, tired understanding. A small tightening at the corners of his mouth, like he was used to this, like he'd seen the recognition flare up in strangers before and didn't expect anything else. He didn't break eye contact, but he didn't smile either. He just looked right through me, like he'd already accepted whatever I might think of him. In that split second, he didn't say anything, obviously, but his expression said everything. Yes, I'm him. No, I'm not a real killer. I know what I look like to you. It wasn't fear I felt. It was discomfort, an involuntary instinct pulling me to move. I nodded slightly, reflex, and kept walking. Brisk pace, straight past him. My body went stiff. My heart rate spiked even though I wasn't moving that fast. I walked with purpose, eyes on the trail, arms swinging slightly. I didn't turn around, not for 100 yards. And when I finally did glance back, just a quick over-the-shoulder look. He was gone. No figure on the trail behind me. No footsteps. No movement. I scanned the edges of the path, the dry brush, the low trees. Nothing. I kept walking. But now something had changed. It wasn't the light. It wasn't the trail. It was me. I was hyper-aware now. Every crackle in the underbrush, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, felt heavier, felt loaded. My flashlight was still in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out yet. I still had a little light left. The shadows were long, but I could make out the trail just fine. I moved faster now, not running, just more alert. My boots landed harder. My breathing got shallow. I wasn't scared. Not exactly, but something about that man stuck in my mind and wouldn't let go. And then I saw the boot print. It was just past the next bend. in a patch of fine dust near a low incline. Deep, clear, larger than mine, and it was on top of the dust that my own prints had disturbed on the way up. That made no sense. He had been coming from the opposite direction. We crossed paths. He should have passed me once. That was it. So how the hell was he ahead of me now? I froze, looked around. No side trails, no shortcuts. That's when I noticed the smell. Very faint, sharp, almost like gasoline. Maybe paint thinner, something artificial. It was barely there, just riding the breeze. My hands were trembling now. I pulled out the flashlight and turned it on, low beam, just enough to see a few feet in front of me. Every time I pointed it into the brush, I expected to see something, someone, staring back, but there was nothing. I kept going. 3 miles down, 2 left. The trail climbed again. A short, steep section with loose rocks. I moved quickly, careful with my footing, scanning the sides. Every 5 or 6 steps, I glanced back. Still nothing. And then I saw it, just off the trail, resting against a rock. Piece of paper. I stepped closer, sweeping the flashlight over it. It was a printed photo, black and white, a young version of the man I'd just seen. Studio headshot, smiling, clean-shaven, eyes looking just past the camera. No name, no signature, just the face. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. I didn't even want to know if it was paper or glossy photo stock. I just looked at it for a second, long enough to confirm I wasn't imagining it, then stepped around it. It was intentional. That was clear. I walked the last stretch with the flashlight shaking in my hand. The trail wound back toward the parking area. I could smell the city again, faint but familiar. A breeze kicked up, cold now. I passed the last trail marker, a metal post with faded numbers and stickers. My car came into view like a life raft. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there, not crying, not panicking, just stunned. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about his face, the weight behind it, the tired eyes. Not angry, not mocking, just used to it. Used to being seen not as a person, but as that guy. And maybe that's all it was. A man taking a walk in the hills, just like me. Maybe he left that photo because he knew what I thought. Maybe it wasn't a threat. Maybe it wasn't even weird to him. Maybe it was routine. But I never hiked that loop at dusk again. I started going earlier, daylight hours only, and I never saw him again. But that boot print stayed on the trail for weeks. I checked every time, and every time I walked around it, just in case. I don't usually do winter hikes, not because I'm afraid of the cold or snow, though I don't love either, but because I like seeing where I'm going. I like dry trails, clear skies, easy exits. That's just how I think. I've always been careful, maybe too careful. The type who checks trail maps the night before, lays out gear in neat rows, brings backups for backups. I'm not a survivalist or anything. I just don't like surprises out in the wild. But that year, something changed. Work had been relentless. My apartment in the city had become a place I barely recognized. Just a spot I passed out in between meetings and phone calls. I felt like I was being slowly pressed between 2 glass plates. So, when an old college friend named Mark texted about a weekend snow hike in the North Woods, middle of nowhere, total silence, untouched forest, I said yes before I even thought about it. That was out of character for me, but that's how badly I needed out. We drove up on a Friday, into the deep parts of northern Vermont, hours past anything most people would call civilization. No towns, no lights, no phone signal, just dense pine forest blanketed in thick snow. The roads were narrow and half-plowed, and our SUV fishtailed a few times before we reached the logging trail that served as the closest thing to a parking area. There were 4 of us, me, Mark, his younger brother Pete, and a guy named Dan that none of us knew very well. Mark said Dan worked with him and was good at wilderness stuff, whatever that meant. I didn't ask questions. I was just glad to be out of the city. We packed light but smart layers, snowshoes, water filters, high-calorie food. Each of us had a thermal sleeping bag and compact tent. Mark brought a GPS tracker, and I had printed maps with pencil-marked trails, even though most were faded or outdated. We weren't planning on bushwhacking too far, just a 10-mile loop through deep woods, circling back on day 3. We started just after sunrise. The cold bit through our gloves almost instantly. It was the kind of cold that makes your eyes water and your lips split if you talk too much. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and we had to move slow. Every hour felt like 2. The sun stayed low in the sky, never rising far enough to warm us. The woods were empty, not just quiet but hollow.
No Birdsson.
No movement. Even the wind seemed to die once we got more than a mile in. Just trees and white, and the soft creak of our snowshoes pressing down the powder. That first night, we camped near a dry stream bed, built a small fire, ate protein bars and freeze-dried meals, and zipped into our tents by 7 p.m. Nobody wanted to sit out long. I barely slept. Every sound outside the tent jolted me. The pop of tree bark in the cold. The faint thud of snow dropping from a branch. Somewhere in the distance, maybe a fox yelping, though it could have just been ice shifting. The world felt thinner out there, more fragile. By morning, the fire pit was buried in a fresh half-inch of snow. The temp had dropped well below 0 overnight, and Dan's water filter cracked when he tried to thaw it with his breath. We shared supplies and moved on. The trail disappeared by mile 6, just blank white and tree trunks. We navigated by compass and guesswork. Then, late that second afternoon, we found the words. We were cutting through a shallow valley, maybe 50 yards across, flanked by tall pines that had dropped snow in uneven mounds. Pete was walking ahead of me and stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. Mark was off to the left, and Dan trailed behind. I looked down where Pete was pointing. There, in the snow in front of us, someone had drawn letters. Big ones, maybe 2 feet tall. They stretched in a slight curve, as if traced by a stick or gloved hand. Per audacia ad ignotum, Latin, clear, sharp, no smudges, no distortion from wind or melting. But here's the thing that froze my gut. There were no footprints around the words. None. No entry tracks. No exits. Just untouched snow in every direction. Except for ours. Pete looked back at me. I looked at Mark. No one said anything. Just 4 people staring at clean, deliberate writing in the middle of nowhere. I stepped carefully around the edge, inspecting the snow. Not even an animal trail. No drag marks. No indentations. Whoever or whatever had made those letters hadn't walked here. At least not in any way that left a mark. Mark pulled out his phone to take a photo, but of course we had no signal. The camera worked, though. He took a few shots. Pete knelt down to inspect the letters more closely. He scraped the edge with his glove. The snow was maybe 4 inches deep, compact underneath, like someone had cleared the top layer very precisely. Dan finally spoke. I think it's Latin. Something about going toward the unknown. That's what we ended up guessing too. We Googled it when we got back days later and found it roughly meant, through audacity toward the unknown. None of us said it out loud then, but the vibe shifted. We moved on after a while, but not with the same ease. The silence felt heavier now, like the woods were watching us. That night, we camped in a thick grove of firs. We didn't bother with a fire, too cold to sit around. We all just ate quickly and got into our tents. No jokes, no stories, just a shared tension that nobody wanted to name. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to piss. I unzipped my bag, layered up, and stepped out into the snow. It was dead still. Clouds had rolled in, and the moonlight was dull behind them. My breath fogged thick in front of me. I walked a few yards from camp, found a spot, and did what I had to do. When I turned back toward camp, I saw a shape move just beyond the tree line. It was tall, human-shaped, barely visible. I froze. It didn't move again. I stared for a full minute. Nothing. Then I turned and walked back, slow, not looking over my shoulder again until I was zipped back inside my tent. By morning, I was convinced I'd imagined it. Except, Pete said he heard movement too, and Dan looked like he hadn't slept at all. Mark brushed it off. Probably just snow falling from trees. We packed and hiked the rest of the loop with a new pace. Faster, less careful, more eager to get out. We barely spoke. The weirdest part? We never found tracks from anyone else. Not one. The area we were in wasn't closed, but it also wasn't well traveled. No ranger stations, no trail cams, no cabins. Just raw, open forest. And in 3 days, we hadn't seen a single soul. When we got back to the car, it was like stepping into another life. The heater roared. My phone found a signal and started buzzing. We just sat there for a while, thawing out, not talking about it. A week later, I met up with Mark to grab some gear he'd borrowed. We sat in his kitchen, drinking beers, and I finally asked about the writing. He admitted something that made my skin crawl. He'd gone back to look at the photos he took. And in one of the frames, just one, you could see something behind the trees. On the far edge, a figure, barely visible, almost like it was watching. He didn't show me the photo, said he deleted it, said it didn't feel right to keep. I never asked again. I haven't been on a snow hike since. I stick to spring trails now. Daylight hours only, well-traveled paths, no more middle of nowhere. And I never forgot those words, per audacia ad ignotum, through audacity toward the unknown. I don't know who wrote them, or how, or why they left no trace. But I do know one thing, whatever was out there didn't want to be found. And whatever it was, it saw us. And I'm not going back to look for it, ever. I had been driving north for almost 6 hours when the trees began to change. I'm not talking about the type of trees, though they were different, but the way they felt. They grew closer together the farther I got, their tops leaning toward each other like they were whispering something. The road turned narrow and cracked, and my cell service dropped to 0. That was expected. I had planned it that way. I'd found the trail online, a tiny blog run by a guy who documented forgotten places. Abandoned bunkers, collapsed bridges, forgotten towns. One entry mentioned a stone field deep in the mountains near the Vermont-Canada border, an open patch surrounded by dense woods and old rock formations that didn't make sense. The post had no photos, no GPS coordinates, just a hand-drawn sketch and a sentence that stuck with me. It's the way the rocks are placed, like someone made them, but not for us. I don't believe in anything mystical or magical, but I do believe in geography, ancient cultures, erosion patterns, geological formations. I figured it might be something like that. Maybe an old farming boundary, maybe glacial erratics, maybe just a trick of the landscape. Whatever it was, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. The blog was over a decade old. The author hadn't posted in years. That only made it better. I parked my car at a dead end near an old fire road and locked it up. There wasn't a trail marker, just a break in the trees and a faded ribbon tied to a branch, maybe from a hunter or surveyor. I'd printed the blog map and highlighted a rough route. It was supposed to be a 9-mile loop with the stone field about 5 miles in. I had enough food and water for 3 days, a tent, thermal gear, a flare, and a paper map with a compass. I told a friend where I was headed but didn't expect any trouble. I'd done harder hikes before. This was just supposed to be quiet, isolated. It was. The first few miles were steady incline through thick woods. Nothing strange. The ground was wet from melt-off, and I moved slow to avoid slipping. Every now and then I saw signs of old logging, rusted cable, a few stumps too flat to be natural. The deeper I went, the more the trees closed in. They weren't the kind that grow in neat rows. These were wild-growth woods, rough and messy, thick with underbrush. Sunlight came in at strange angles. After 4 hours, I stopped to eat and check my map. According to the sketch, the stone field would be near a shallow valley just past a narrow ridge. It took another hour to find the ridge. I nearly missed it. The trees suddenly parted on one side and dropped off steeply. I used a stick to steady myself as I slid down the slope, boots crunching against loose rock. Then the trees stopped, like all at once. 1 minute I was pushing through pine branches, the next I was standing at the edge of a clearing maybe the size of a football field. It wasn't flat. That was the first thing I noticed. The ground was uneven and littered with stones. Big ones, small ones, sharp angles, flat tops. They weren't in a pile or scattered randomly. They were placed, arranged, set into shapes that didn't match anything I'd ever seen before. It didn't look natural, not in any way I could explain. The stones were old, covered in moss and lichen, worn smooth at the edges, but still sharp in places. Some were stacked, but not like cairns or markers. They leaned at odd angles, interlocked, forming jagged patterns and narrow corridors that twisted through the clearing like someone had started building rooms without walls. I stepped forward carefully. My boots crunched on dry grass and pebbles. No birds, no wind, just quiet. Each formation looked deliberate, but I couldn't tell what the purpose was. Some had flat tops like tables. Others had holes cut through the center, perfectly round. A few were narrow and pointed up like spikes. It reminded me of teeth, or ruins from a civilization that didn't build with straight lines. There was no trash, no signs of fire pits, no graffiti. It didn't look like anyone had camped here in a long time, if ever. The sun was starting to dip, and the shadows moved quick across the stones. I walked the edge of the clearing, tracing the perimeter. Something about the way the rocks were placed messed with my sense of direction. I kept losing track of where I'd started. It didn't feel like a circle or a square, just a series of loops and curves that never quite ended. After a while, I sat on one of the flatter stones and drank water. My pack felt heavy all of a sudden. I thought about setting up my tent there, right at the edge of the field, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I walked 50 yards back into the trees and made camp between two fallen logs. I cleared the snow, pitched the tent, and ate in silence. I didn't sleep well. The cold wasn't the problem, it was the silence. The kind that isn't peaceful but tense, like the woods were holding their breath. A few times I thought I heard stone shift. Not fall, just shift, like something hard brushing against something harder. When I got up at dawn, I had to convince myself to go back into the clearing. I told myself it was just rocks, just a weird arrangement of boulders and slabs, no different than a lava field or dry riverbed. But when I stepped back into the open space, something was off. One of the formations had changed. I was sure of it. A flat slab with 3 holes had been standing upright the day before. Now it was lying on its side, half covered in frost. A smaller stone had been propped under it like a support beam, and there were drag marks in the dirt, shallow but clear. I stared at it for a long time, long enough that the cold made my hands go numb. I didn't take a photo. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I backed out of the clearing and packed my gear. I started back the way I came, but the trail didn't look the same. The ridge I had descended the day before was gone. At least it wasn't where it should have been. The terrain had changed subtly, but enough. The trees leaned differently. The slope was steeper. I thought maybe I just turned the wrong direction, so I circled west and tried again. Nothing. I climbed a tree to get my bearings. I saw woods in every direction. No road, no clearing, no rise. The sun was already past its peak. I gave up trying to retrace my route and decided to head due south until I found something familiar. That was when I found the second clearing. I swear to God it wasn't there before. It was smaller, tighter, maybe half the size of the first, but with the same type of stone formations. Less moss, fewer gaps, like it was newer or less exposed. And right at the center, there was a ring of stones. 8 of them, perfect circle. I didn't go near it. I turned around and started walking fast, south by my compass, not stopping until the light faded and I had to set up camp in the dark. That night, I heard movement. Not animals, not wind, stone, shifting, grinding. I lay still in my bag, not daring to unzip the tent. Around 3 a.m., I saw a shadow move across the fabric. Long, angular, like a piece of rock being carried upright. Paused for a few seconds, then passed. I didn't sleep after that. When light came, I packed without eating and kept walking. The forest started to change. Less pine, more dead trees. The ground turned rocky, then smooth, like glacial polish. I saw scratches in the stone, long parallel lines like claw marks or drag marks. Some were deep enough to trip on. That afternoon, I hit a ridge that gave me a view. I saw a third field. This one was massive. Hundreds of stones, tall ones, arranged in rows like a forgotten cemetery. and I saw something else. Movement. I didn't get a clear look. Just a blur between the stones. Fast. Too tall for a deer. Too narrow for a bear. Something upright. I backed away and didn't stop moving for 2 hours. By sunset, I found the fire road. Just a sliver of gravel and packed dirt, cutting through the trees like a lifeline. I nearly collapsed when I saw my car. It was untouched. The air around it felt warm, even in the cold. I drove without stopping, not even for gas, until I reached the first town with lights. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? I checked the blog again when I got home. It was gone. Domain expired. No archive. I searched for Stonefield and Vermont formations and got nothing but geology sites and rock climbing guides. No other mentions. No one else. It's been a year since that hike. I haven't gone back. I won't, because those rocks were placed by something. Not a person, not a group. Something that doesn't want to be found. And something that moves when you're not looking. And I think it saw me. I think it marked me. When I close my eyes, I still see the stone circle. 8 slabs. 1 space left open. Waiting.
Primer bunt fill italià.
I won't go back. I won't. I started that day like I'd started 100 other hikes. Early morning, low fog, boots tight, gear light, and not a single thought that anything strange would happen. It was July and I was in Pennsylvania. More specifically, I was hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail that some locals called the Boulder Field, though I'd also heard it called the Ankle Breaker and Where Boots Go to Die. That particular stretch of the trail was about 10 miles, give or take. I'd done it twice before, so I knew what to expect. Sharp, uneven rock, long scrambles, roots twisted like old rope, and barely any smooth ground to stand on. It was supposed to be a solo out and back. 5 miles in, 5 miles back, done by lunch. No tent, no sleeping bag, just my hydration pack, snacks, a small first aid kit, and a paper map in case my phone died. The hike started fine. A bit humid, but not too hot. The air felt heavy, but not threatening. Just that muggy, silent kind of stillness that hangs over Pennsylvania woods in summer. Birds chirped off and on. Squirrels darted through underbrush. The only real sound was my boots grinding against the rocks, and the occasional snap of a branch when I misjudged my step. I passed 2 groups that morning. One older couple who looked exhausted already, and a solo woman with trail running gear who barely acknowledged me. After that, I was alone. Around mile 4, the trees got thicker, the light got dimmer, and the rocks got worse. They weren't boulders in the sense that you could go around them. They were the trail. The whole path turned into a mess of sharp, jagged stone. None of it level, none of it easy. You had to keep your eyes on your feet at all times, or you'd trip and land hard. It was during this stretch that I saw him. First, I thought he was hurt. I'd rounded a bend and saw someone standing about 30 yards ahead, not moving. My first instinct was that they were limping or maybe stretching out a cramp. I slowed down, watching. He stood still for a few seconds, then adjusted his pack and started walking again. That was when I noticed he wasn't wearing any clothes. Not a stitch. No shoes, no shirt, not even a pair of shorts. Just a sun-bleached ball cap, a small dusty backpack that hung high between his shoulder blades, and 2 trekking poles that clicked and scraped over the rocks with every step. I stopped walking, confused. He wasn't running or stumbling, just walking steady and strong like it was the most normal thing in the world. His skin was leathery and pale in some spots, dark in others like he'd been sunburnt and healed a dozen times over. His shoulders were thin, his back wiry, his calves lined with veins that stood out like cables. He looked to be in his late 60s, maybe older. I thought he might walk past me without a glance, but he didn't. He made a wide arc and came up beside me like we were old friends meeting at a fork in the trail. He smiled. I nodded politely. Then he started walking again, slow and steady, and for some reason I followed. I didn't know what else to do. It felt rude to just stop or turn around when someone passed you like that. And something about him didn't seem dangerous, just odd, inexplicable. So I stayed behind him, maybe 10 feet back, watching his bare feet find their way over sharp rock like it was nothing. And he talked. I don't remember everything he said. His voice was slow and deep, but it didn't sound drunk or confused, just steady, like someone narrating a story he'd already told 1,000 times. He talked about old trail shelters, rainstorms he'd walked through, a bear he'd once seen in Virginia. He spoke about mile markers, trail angels, a guy he'd met back in the 70s who swore by eating raw onions. None of it made much sense, and he never looked back to see if I was still there. He just kept walking, clicking his poles, letting the words spill out like a creek overflowing. I wanted to ask him about the clothes, about his feet, about how he wasn't cut to hell from all the rocks. But I didn't. It was like he didn't leave room for questions. Eventually, I stopped trying to understand what he was saying, turned into background noise. I just kept walking, kept my eyes down, watched those bare feet move from rock to root like they'd been doing it since before I was born. Then something strange happened. We passed a tree I recognized, a thick old thing with a split down the center and a plastic tag nailed into its bark. I passed it on the way in, so I knew we were close to the turnaround point. Except we weren't. The tree was on the other side of the trail. We were heading the same direction I had been all morning, which didn't make sense. If I was hiking back the way I came, the tree should have been on my right, but it was on the left, and we were still going forward, not back. That meant I hadn't turned around. I stopped walking. He kept going. The forest swallowed him in seconds. Just his hat and his poles and those pale shoulders fading into the green. I stood there, trying to figure out how far we'd walked. I checked my watch. It was past noon. I should have turned back an hour ago. I hadn't even noticed the time passing. I took out my map and tried to orient myself. The problem was none of the landmarks matched. I didn't recognize the terrain. The trail looked the same in both directions. The rocks, the trees, the little curves, it all blurred together. I turned around and started walking back. Fast. No more curiosity. No more questions. I just wanted to get to the car. The problem was, I couldn't find any of the trail markers I'd passed earlier. No split tree, no ridge, no water cache someone had left at the halfway point. It was like I'd stepped off the path without knowing it. Then I saw the footprints. Not mine, not boot prints, bare feet, dry dirt, fresh enough to hold the shape. I crouched down and counted them. 2 sets, both heading forward. His and mine. I hadn't turned around. I just followed him deeper. That was when the air changed. It got heavier, not hotter, just still. Like the wind had stopped, like the sound had dropped out of the forest. No birds, no squirrels, not even the buzz of insects. Just dead silence. And I felt it. Not fear. Not yet. Just something wrong. Like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to see. I kept going anyway. Another mile passed. Maybe 2. I started hearing the poles again. That soft scrape tap, up ahead, through the trees. Not loud, just enough to know he was close. I didn't want to see him again, but I didn't want to get lost either. I figured if I followed the sound, I'd get back to the trail. Then I saw the sign, hand-painted, nailed to a tree. A single word, Lefty. No arrow, no explanation, just the name. I stopped. I don't know why that shook me more than anything else, but it did. Maybe because it meant someone else knew him. Someone had taken the time to mark this part of the trail with his name. I turned and went the other way. Didn't run, just walked fast, focused, eyes on the ground, breathing sharp. It took over an hour, but I finally saw something familiar. An old crushed water bottle someone had wedged into a tree hollow. I remembered that. I passed it on the way in. Then the trail opened up a little, the rocks thinned, and I started recognizing more. A bent metal post, a blue ribbon tied to a sapling. Finally, the trailhead. When I saw my car, I sat down on the ground beside it and just breathed for 10 minutes. I never saw him again. But a week later, out of dumb curiosity, I posted about the hike in a small trail group online. I didn't give much detail, just said I'd met an older barefoot hiker near the Pennsylvania rock fields. 3 people responded within an hour. One said, "Oh, that's Lefty. Legend." Another wrote, "Still going strong. Huh? A third messaged me privately. All they said was, "You followed him too long. Don't do that again." I didn't answer. I haven't hiked that section since. But I think about him. I think about the skin on his back, cracked and sunburnt. I think about those feet, calloused and red and somehow untouched. I think about the poles, tapping over sharp rock like he was walking on flat ground. And I think about the name on the tree. That part stuck with me more than anything else. Because there's something unsettling about people like that. People who don't seem bound by the same rules. Who walk paths the rest of us don't see. Who don't need shoes or shirts or answers. Who don't look back. He wasn't scary. Not in a traditional way. But I'm not sure he was normal either. And I'm not sure he was ever planning to stop.